Welcome to the Analytics Engineering Podcast, featuring conversations with practitioners inventing the future of analytics engineering.
On this episode, Tristan and I sit down with two data leaders at Ramp, Ian Macomber, who's the head of analytics engineering and data science, and Ryan Delgado, who's a staff software engineer on the data platform team. Ramp is a fast-growing startup that offers corporate credit cards integrated with expense management, and their data team is a critical part of the company's success. I like this episode a lot because everyone in the industry speaks about how can we get analytics engineering teams collaborating better with data science and software engineering teams. And I think Ian and Ryan have figured a lot of this out. It starts with the right organizational structure with fluid teams oriented around impact. They've also elevated the role of the data team to be on equal footing with product engineering and design. And we dive deep into some of the projects that the data team helped enable, not just for Ramp internally, but also for Ramp's customers.
This is one of those episodes where I feel like as soon as I digest the conversation, I immediately want to schedule a follow-up episode. I think that everyone listening to this is going to get a lot of value out of it, but you're also going to hear things that you've probably heard before and that you've thought about yourself. My takeaway is that many of the things that Ramp's team is doing are not so groundbreaking or unique. They're just executing them incredibly well. There is some secret sauce happening inside of this organization where best practices that you have read about are really working. And so maybe a part of the secret sauce is the two people that we have on the episode here.
Yeah, I felt similarly. I think it's undeniable that Ramp has had extreme success. They're only a few years old and they've accomplished so much in creating an $8 billion business, their valuation from almost nothing a few years back. And we talk a lot about organizational structure, how the data team really gets to contribute to high impact work. And we even go into back and forth in the episode. It's we've tried some of these things out ourselves. We ended up landing with a different structure that works well for us at DBT Labs. So it's definitely not a one size fits all advice. But for me, I think the exciting thing about what's happening at Ramp is data is their secret sauce. It's their reason for being so successful. And that's not always the case for other companies. They're a credit card company. They have to deal with risk. And so Ian and Ryan have really elevated seats at Ramp in helping their organization do incredible things, because if they get the data things wrong, they're not going to be nearly as successful. So it was a fun episode. We go into a lot of their thinking about how they structure teams, how they have people contribute to work, how to have higher impact as a data organization. And I hope people get some ideas to bring back to their organizations as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. Well, welcome. Today we have two guests on the show from Ramp, Ian Macomber, head of analytics engineering and data science, and Ryan Delgado, a staff software engineer on the data platform team. And for our listeners who don't know Ramp, it's a startup that provides corporate credit cards that seamlessly integrates with Ramp's expense management software. And the company was last valued at $8 billion, which is incredible growth since the company was founded only recently in 2019. So I met these folks, Ian and Ryan, at a dinner in New York, hosted by our friends at Materialize. I had a really fun conversation with them, learning about how the Ramp team does data a little bit differently. And I thought it'd be really exciting to bring them on the show. So welcome, Ian and Ryan.
Thanks for having us. Really excited to be here.
That's intense. $8 billion valuation after 4 years. How long have you two been with the company? Did you join 1 year ago and you were at the company's tripled in size since then?
I joined in February of 2022, and I believe we have, in the year 2022, we doubled our transaction volume and actually quadrupled our revenue, and we've been growing quite a bit in 2023 as well. I joined in November of 2021. I think it was engineer number 40 and employee number 150-ish. And we've since, I think our engineering org is something nuts, 120 or 130 engineers. And we're approaching 600 total full-time employees. So it's been a wild ride up.
I'm always interested in these stories of hypergrowth. What is that key thing that the company nailed that caused the market to just kind of pull product out of you?
I think to a large extent, really just positioning ourselves as a company-friendly credit card. And I think the previous experience of sort of saying, hey, you have a company, Amex and Expensify, and at the end of the month, you have to find all of your paper receipts and log them. Thinking about having that be a proactive move just makes so much sense. And so just as an example, when I go out to dinner and I spend money on my Ramp card, I get a push notification on my cell phone. I take a photo of the receipt as I get it. We auto match a whole bunch of that. And so we really close the books constantly. And if you think about that from a CFO perspective, from a director of finance perspective, or even from an employee perspective, the idea of walking around with a whole bunch of paper receipts in your wallet, hoping you're going to get reimbursed for them at the end of the month, it just really doesn't make a ton of sense. So I think just sort of that visual and the product that we've been able to build about really making sure that your credit card and your expense management policy are built sort of under one roof, it just makes a ton of sense. And I think that's why it's been adopted so frequently.
I think the only thing that I would add there is we really nailed product market fit, but I think it's something that we do extremely well is we have an engineering driven culture. And so that enables us to iterate quickly, build products that customers want, and also attract really talented individuals. All that's been really key to building the best product on the market and also growing really quickly.
I'd say one thing that I've noticed as an outsider of Ramp is you move super, super quickly, and it's that like speed and urgency that's really taken you very far. And I love learning a little bit more about how you all build product. I recently read this article on Lenny's newsletter that talked about the PEDD strategy, which most people wouldn't know that acronym. Most people know the acronym is EPD, Engineering, Product, and Design. But it seems like at Ramp, you figured out how to ship with really high velocity and given data a seat at the table as the final D in the PEDD pillars. Tell us a little bit more about how Ramp's able to move so quickly and why you made the decision to elevate data as an equal player to product engineering and design.
Like we've said, we really believe at Ramp that speed is a competitive advantage. And we believe that this organization is kind of the optimal org chart that lets us both build, ship, and measure products as fast as possible. So I'll give you an example of what this looks like. We have an accounting product. That product has a pod. That pod has a product manager, a tech lead, front-end, back-end engineer. And then somewhat recently, we hired an analytics engineer and a data scientist to work on that pod. And for both of them, I put together a 30-60-90. We dropped them into the pod. And 2 weeks later, they said, hey, I'm not going to work on my 30-60-90. I'm going to work on this stuff instead. And we said, that's exactly what we want to hear. You have been adopted by the pod. You are one with the pod. And this is the group you're accountable to now. And so really what this comes down to for us is we want to empower those closest to the product to own the roadmap and own the decisions. This is what lets us make really fast decisions. So we have a great VP of product, but I think he is just as likely to find out what the accounting team is working on based on release notes and not necessarily putting his own thought into the accounting roadmap. We trust that team to work really fast. And then another really important thing here is the compounding context that you get of being in this group and working with these people day in and day out for months. There are very few areas where a data professional can sort of parachute in, build the perfect model, and parachute out. If you think about how data works for accounting product, you really need to know the engineering stack, and you need to know the design philosophy, and you need to know a lot about accounting. And this is not something that you can really pick up unless you've been on that team for a while. And then finally, I think every data professional has some story of being asked to measure a product that was launched without instrumentation. And every growth analyst has some story of someone on the marketing team buying a whole bunch of billboards a month ago, and then they get asked after the fact to measure incrementality when there was no experimental design. That's not the case for us. When we launch new features for our accounting product, these people are in the room, they're contributing to the definitions of success, and our products are really built in a way such that we can answer questions ahead of time. And I think then maybe, a good follow-up to Ryan is, in that setting, how do you think about if everyone's working on these tight product pods, how do you build platforms? So maybe I'll kick it over to Ryan to talk a little bit about how platforms work at Ramp.
I think we take it a step further with the PED pods in that we also embed platform engineers onto these pods. It's not just product engineers and data folks, but my folks are embedded in some of these pods as well, my data platform team. The way that we think about it is Ramp is that pure platform teams, they're often too far removed from the business problems to have the empathy and business context to make the right calls and what to prioritize. Maybe they tend to over-optimize certain things too soon. What we actually want to do is optimize the right things and move with velocity. So the best example that I could think of is, from Lenny's blog, our payments platform team was initially embedded within our bill pay product pod because most of the use cases were for B2B payments. And so after we had a few wins under our belts within bill pay, we then spun off that team into a separate team and generalized the use cases outside of bill pay. And that's where we're at today. And so similarly with the data science platform team, two of my most senior engineers, they're embedded on the risk intelligence pod. And so when we're building out a platform component like our feature platform, our feature store, we didn't build out the platform first. The very first thing that we did was build out our first use case in production on production day. We learned how did this product work, and then also what's the ideal development workflow. And based on those learnings, then we built out things like observability, CI/CD, what's the path to production look like, so we can generalize it to other problems within risk and eventually outside of risk.
So it seems like you asked people to stretch quite a bit. There's a different skill set sometimes between working with direct team, working on some accounting problem versus some like platform data work. Has that been hard for people, or do you like hire for a specific kind of background where folks at Ramp can really stretch?
I think it's difficult. The key there is just to make sure that you have the right people that have empathy for the business problems and want to build the best thing possible. We just hire really good people and be able to handle it.
I don't know if this is surprising to hear, but I think everybody feels like they hire really good people. The way that you describe the way you operate seems very compelling, and you're both very compelling at describing it. You're living it every day. It's working. But my guess is that I think in general in org structures, you're always dealing with trade-offs. There's no perfect org structure. There's, the perfect org structure for the work to be done and the team that you have and then, all of this context. Do you feel like there is a trade-off to the way that you are organizing here, and what is?
Certainly, right. When I have conversations with a lot of people on my team, I think one of the biggest challenges can be silos. You can come in and get to know everything about the accounting product. And to a massive extent, the people on my team know much more about their surface area than I ever will. And so I think oftentimes what that leads to is a situation where you say, hey, there's 10 things I might be able to do. I'm really only be able to get to, 3 or 4 of them, 5 if I work super hard. And I have to figure out how to resolve that ambiguity, execute on what I'm supposed to. And I might not necessarily get a pat on the back from someone who knows exactly what I was supposed to be working on and why. So I think that is one trade-off. And I think for us, really what we're trying to figure out as a company is basically as we continue to grow, as we have sort of a more complex team, more overlap, more platforms, more financial products, how can we continue to build that context such that people can continue to go deep and be really the experts in their domain, but also continue to raise the bar of the context of what's going on for the entire company.
Yeah, I can share how we do things at DBT Labs, and it's been different at different stages of our business. But we used to have a pretty similar structure where each of the pods were enabled to make decisions, set their own roadmap. You had the people you needed to work effectively. I think the trade-off we saw there was a lot of competing priorities across teams. And so if you had heavy reliance from each of the pods on a different pod, if you didn't have this overarching goal or direction that everyone needed to accomplish, you had friction in where you were going to spend your time. So we've moved a little bit more to a like W planning, where it's top setting the vision, the like individual teams get to respond to that, surface back up what they're going to work on, top down again, revisions, and then finally like execution. And it helps in that everyone's kind of moving in the same direction. And then one of the things that we are exploring now is like getting the data team closer to the product work, because I would strongly agree that it's really hard for someone with a data background to just drop into or parachute into a team without having worked really closely with them. And so we're trying to have closer ties where we have dedicated analytics engineers on different product surface areas.
We've been talking a lot about data when it comes to the EPD org or the PEDD org. How are you organized on the more go-to-market? Do you carry through the same concepts of embedding?
Within growth and growth product, we also have PEDD orgs dedicated to those organizations. So for example, we have a growth product team. We have a acquisition marketing team. And as I think like everyone in MarTech knows, that does require oftentimes a lot of product and engineering resources. We have a business systems team that's thinking about how to optimize all things for sales. one question and sort of area where we do not have a dedicated product team is to strategic finance. And as we think about strategic finance, essentially, it's almost analogous to something like security and compliance, where we expect security and compliance to be built in all of our products. We also think a lot about strategic finance through all of our products. So I would sort of say that's a lens that we overlay on top of our bill pay product, our card product, our reimbursements product. But largely, I would sort of say our product engineering culture is not necessarily just stuff that you see in the Ramp application. It's also all the ads we show on our website. It's also the emails that we send. And it's also our internal tools and systems to make people more productive.
I want to talk a little bit more about this tension that always exists between maintaining control over what teams are working on and giving them velocity and enablement to make their own decisions. I know, Ian, we've spoken about this before and how you've changed some of your opinions on like who is empowered to participate in some of the data work. Tell me a little bit about like where you started and what motivated your change in thinking.
So this is probably one of the biggest 180s I've done in my time at Ramp. So when I joined, I was really of the mindset that our SQL and Python code base is our baby. Our standards are high. And I really thought that our code quality would degrade if we allowed others to join and contribute. Since then, I think the biggest thing I've learned is business logic always finds a way. Like it always finds a way to be written. We have really smart and technical and resourceful and fast-moving stakeholders. We have a lot of them. And what we found is that core reporting ended up in other systems, and oftentimes it was unexpected. So we had a lot of business logic at the edge. I think like everyone probably has some story of, a Excel sheet that powered most of business decisions, or, a super complex Looker custom dimension that should have been refactored into DBT, or maybe someone's personal Jupyter notebook that they run every once in a while to update the finance team. We definitely had some stuff that I didn't know about, where it was single analysis on maybe someone's personal machine or personal schema. And I think in those settings, you really realize that you need a gravitational pull back to the center. Because definitely for me and Ryan, it's really kind of a losing battle to keep finding important data assets and rewriting them centrally. And the only way forward, I think, is to welcome others in. So we really changed a lot of our philosophy. We wrote our documentation, we changed our standards, and we really invited others in to learn how our team works, how to contribute to our code base, where things should go and why. There's definitely been hiccups along the way, but I think overall it's led to, healthier code. People are excited to write DBT, especially the people that are not necessarily on our team. And we have a lot more both centralized business logic as well as visibility into usage. And I think as a result, we're moving a lot faster. The big thing I learned and kind of takeaway I would have is always ask your stakeholders what they actually look at to make decisions. You might think and hope it is the gorgeous Looker dashboard built on beautifully normalized Kimball model DBT, but oftentimes it's not. And so I think, you'll often be surprised. And I think it's sort of on us as data leaders to look at what people are actually using to make decisions.
What's your definition of others? You said we welcome others. Is that literally anybody at the company that raises their hands? Like you'll sign them up for an internal enablement course and give them the keys to the kingdom? Like how do you define that?
It's partially org chart, partially interest. So I would definitely not say we're kind of farming out to the entire company saying, hey, come be an expert in this stuff. I would say we have a layer of analysts like many companies. We have growth analysts, we have risk analysts. They definitely fall into this bucket. And then we also have just found some people who are really scrappy and entrepreneurial, where you look at what they've built in Retool, or you look at what they've built in Looker, and you're like, hey, this person's really impressive. The work they're doing is driving a lot of decisions. I think we can upskill them. I think we can have their work be more powerful and more extensible. So largely, I'd sort of say both those that demonstrate interest and those that kind of sit directly one downstream from us.
What can you share about that hidden last mile analytics that you didn't find out about until there was like a major problem on your hands?
Yeah, so maybe I can start on this one and hand it off to Ryan. In my opinion, generally, the 24-hour batch SQL stack is pretty well solved. Like you show up, it all works. DBT is tremendous. Snowflake's tremendous. The BI tools are tremendous. And I think oftentimes when that breaks down is we need to build reporting very quickly at low latency at what's going on to your systems. Fortunately, I think we had some of that stuff in place. I think other pieces we definitely did not have. And that's a big sort of reason why we designed our future data platform the way we did. So I'll hand it over to Ryan to talk a little bit about that.
the standard tools of the modern data stack, they break down to an extent. So we can't move as quickly as we need to if we're just using Looker, Snowflake, and dbt and relying on a daily Airflow DAG. We need changes as they happen. We also need to be able to build a dashboard rapidly. We can't afford to wait for a production deploy or any pipeline run. So in that situation, I mean, it might seem like a bonkers idea, but what we did is we actually gave analysts direct read access to a read-only instance of our Postgres database for our application and had them work in Redash. So they're effectively looking at live production data and developing in production. And yeah, I mean, it may seem bonkers. It breaks a lot of industry best practices, but it worked incredibly well for us. We moved really quickly. We're able to position ourselves in a good spot. Iteration velocity is absolutely key there.
So you need real time is what I'm hearing. And you couldn't have like a daily DAG to do your batch transformations because people are making decisions in seconds or minutes. I have so many questions about letting analysts get read access to your production database, and you're dealing with credit cards. So I imagine there's a whole PII sensitivity piece too that you have to solve, or what did you figure out as a good practice there?
Yeah, it's something that's top of mind for us. But what you have to do is just get creative with tools that you can put in place, maybe in front of the read-only instance of that database. And so, we have a tool that we're working with right now that through Redash, it logs every single query that goes to Postgres, and I can tie it directly to our Delgado at Ramp. Additionally, before surface the query results eyeballs of the query author in flight, it can detect when there's PII and mask it so that we're concealing to only the right folks. And so, in the system, we can manage who has access to it. Maybe only the fraud team or certain members of the growth team can access these email addresses, stuff like that. Whereas everyone else on the engineering team or on the general risk ops team doesn't have access to that. So we're not just careless with client data or customer data. We're still maintaining best standards around PII handling and sensitive data, but we're also moving quickly.
I love there's a Venn diagram overlap where you can do both of those things. I feel like frequently there's an assumption that you have to have a trade-off. You have to move more slowly if you're going to comply with the security best practices. To say that we refuse to compromise here, we're going to do both, I think is a powerful statement.
I think with the current tech stack, yes, you often face that trade-off. But I mean, if you have, let's say, a very young startup that's very innovative in space, has a solution for that nobody has seen before, then you don't really have that trade-off.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. You're using some. Maybe I'll go there. I'm kind of curious because I've seen Ramp adopt really early technologies and be very successful with them. And so what I believe you're kind of talking around is that you've are using some technology that helps you be really compliant and secure and not have any of these risks with treating your customer or client data very carefully, but you still have velocity because you've are partnering with technology that allows you to do this responsibly. Ramp's been really good at adopting new tech quickly. How has that been indoctrinated in your team's philosophy, and how has that gone for you in just adopting new tech quickly?
To generalize past tech vendors, for Ramp, we really like to take bets with asymmetric upside and really invest in slope and spikiness. So whether this is hiring, whether it's data science research, whether it's building products, whether it's vendor selection, we try to ask, what does this person do better than anything? What does this tool do better than anything? And can I imagine in my gut that a year from now, they're going to be even better at it? So a phrase that I love generally is code is not an asset, code is liability. So for me, right, if a teammate's thinking about something, I say, don't just tell me why you're going to build it. Tell me why you're going to commit to maintain it in perpetuity. You think about moving data from Google Ads to Snowflake. Ramp needs to do that. Everyone needs to do that. So for us, right, that's not strategic. We can take a dependency on Fivetran, and I'm confident Fivetran is going to be better at that next year than this year. And so when we think about, the vendors that we like to bet on, really what we're saying is, hey, I bet the value that this person is going to be able to deliver next month is going to grow faster, both than we could possibly build in-house or buy from a mega corporation. And I think also, right, what's the worst that could happen? Because oftentimes, whether it's, individuals or products or vendors, they don't all have to work. What you really need to find is those massive upside bets for the business. And certainly we have a lot of partners that we've worked with so far where we have grown on their backs. And I think Ryan can talk a little bit more about that as well.
Ramp is not unique. We work with a lot of SaaS vendors as part of our operations, and the platform a similar situation. But some of the problems that we face within data, they're niche problems, and there isn't really like a snowflake to solve that problem. Things like, I don't know, handling data privacy while being able to calculate. So with something like that, we kind of need to make a decision between either building it ourselves or trying out some vendor or managed service. I mean, the calculus for me looks like buy versus build. I either hire a full-time engineer and have them build something for 3-6 months and then maintain it for the rest of their time here, or I could pay a managed service for less than the full-time engineer's salary and get it immediately. But the risk is that with buying from young startups, the product is either more issues with stability, or maybe it doesn't do everything that we want it to do right away. So it's an exercise that an issue that we've encountered many times to kind of mitigate those risks. Let's say on the product apps, I mean, I think the key there is to provide regular feedback and really help drive the product roadmap. Be very specific about what we want and hold them accountable to delivering on those objectives. And additionally, we just need to continuously evaluate the vendor relationship, ask questions like, are things improving over time? Is the software becoming more stable? Are they featureizing the product in the right way? Are we getting more value out of it than pain long term? And if we realize that we're actually getting more pain than value, we need to end the relationship, cut our losses.
So I think that's like a thoughtful way of thinking about what do you buy versus build. It seems to me that you want to make sure you're spending your engineering efforts on things that are unique to Ramp's success. And when you can outsource, you choose to do that. One of the really cool products that you recently launched was something called Ramp Intelligence, which was, I imagine, a pretty big investment across your PEDD teams. And I'd love to hear a little bit more, like tell the audience, like, what is Ramp Intelligence? Why did you take it on? And how did it come from idea to in customers' hands?
Ramp Intelligence is a broad suite of often LLM-powered solutions embedded to our platform. 4 of them, for example, are vendor price intelligence. We have an accounting copilot. We have contract digestion and negotiation. And we also have a lot of automated accounting processes. So I'll talk a little bit about price intelligence and accounting, which are sort of the 2 products I've been closest to. So very generally, Ramp has a ton of contracts and bills from vendors. And if you think about maybe 4 years ago, it would have required a lot of human operator time to go through these contracts on really a line by line basis to see what's included. They're not standardized. They're not JSON blobs. And there's SKUs, there's pricing, there's seats, there's contract length. You really would have had to read hundreds of contracts to see what's reasonable. And that's actually exactly what we did to get started and really understand this problem. And now, for example, we prompt LLMs, including GPT-4, to parse these contracts from unstructured data to very structured and standardized form. And that really allows us to aggregate and determine how much is paid for specific product plans and really understand the shape and distributions here. So using millions of historic credit card, bill pay transactions, and it allows customers to benchmark the price of their software purchases.
Let me just make sure I understand what's happening there. You're looking for line items on invoices and saying you just bought product X and you paid $A for it, but somebody just bought product X and they paid $B for it. And so you paid more. Is that correct?
I would say in an ideal world, that happens before you sign the contract. So we also do this in the procurement phase. But yeah, I think the ideal is, look, I lead a data team. I'm managing 6 SaaS vendors-ish. Our CFO is probably dealing with, or we don't have a CFO, but CFOs generally are dealing with hundreds plus. And so for us, kind of the dream is we can say, look, if you have 100 SaaS contracts, here are 80 that are market, here are 4 that are really bad, and here's the next one that's coming up for renewal, and you can do that all passively. So that's kind of the dream.
That's unbelievable.
So Ramp is disrupting all of enterprise sales.
Yeah, like the whole unlisted price is like something that software has assumed for, I don't know, ever.
Kind of go back to both my personal experience and kind of what I imagine this is like for, a head of finance, right? My first time leading a data team, I had only worked at a mega company. I had not done negotiation. I did not know that, a sales team always has a quota to hit and whether or not these discounts are actually expiring. And, a lot of the tools I bought, I think in retrospect.
You definitely didn't buy the last day of the month or last day of the quarter.
Some of them I got a fine deal and some of them I definitely did not get a good deal. And I think about, my incentives to a large extent were not necessarily to save as much money as possible for the company. It was kind of just to not really look like an idiot in front of, my senior leadership team. And senior leadership team knows just as little about, hey, what should Looker cost? And how much of that is platform versus usage versus seat-based? And what's a developer role? And what's an admin role? How many of these things do we need? And a lot of it is just frankly pretty overwhelming. And so I actually think there's a lot of value that we get by saying, guess what? This SaaS vendor doesn't let you discount. And I'll just give you two examples. Figma and Slack, there's not a lot of price discrepancy there, but that's actually extremely valuable if you have to think about, hey, I have 80 SaaS deals. I need to save 10% in aggregate. I shouldn't even bark up these trees. Like it's not a good use of time. Let's focus on, the 5 worst ones. And so I think it really is both like a lot of operational leverage in terms of money savings, but I would also add, as everyone kind of knows, like this stuff takes a lot of time and really being armed, with ramp price intelligence powered by large language models. I think we've already built something pretty special.
I was totally blown away too. When I heard about this, Tristan, I was like, wow, like everyone would want this. And what's really cool about this product is it's completely data driven, and you needed a data team to get the data in a normalized state, let people understand like where are they on the curve. And I think it's fascinating to think about the impact that a data team can have in a customer facing product. We've spoken about a lot, like what is the role of a data analyst or a data platform engineer, and how can they grow their careers? And usually it's limited by how much impact can you have. And you've just described something that's like extraordinarily high impact for both customers and of course, like Ramp as a business. Are there other examples of this, or like what advice might you give to people who are on data teams looking to grow impact?
When you think about the worst thing that could happen to a data professional 10 years ago, it was probably putting a wrong number into a board deck or an important internal presentation. And now, to a large extent, you can break internal tools and data products and marketing automations and production applications. So I think this is all exciting, right? It's like the scope is bigger and what can go wrong is bigger. And so I think really kind of my advice is sort of both upstream and downstream. So I think upstream, it would sort of be, create production grade data exhausts. And so many people have written about this, but, if companies want to build really powerful data products and leverage data science, they should also believe in creating deliberate production data to power machine learning. And this really requires partnering with engineers and sort of like a company-wide alignment that data should be, deliberately and proactively created, not, painfully and reactively extracted. And I think the other one is downstream. If you are a data person and you understand the narrative of your senior leaders and can connect your work back to them, it's a superpower. And so really paying attention to where they spend their time and what they care about and doing work that solves the problems they care most about. So just as an example, like before I have one-on-ones with our CTO or VP of engineering or VP of product, I look at what channels they're spending their time in. And that's really helpful because I can come with recommendations and action items on topics they haven't even asked me to prep for yet. And I think that also goes the other way. If you're a senior leader, tell people your narrative and tell people what they care about and let them help you. So for example, Ramp publishes our board slides to the entire company every quarter. There are sections that are in red where we're like, this is not going well. Like we don't really try to hide this, and it really lets the entire company focus on what matters. And I try to do the same thing for the subset of the data team and make it really clear about what's keeping me up at night. So I think that would kind of be the advice is like work upstream, create exhausts that you can work on, and work downstream to really understand the context of your leadership team.
Ryan, I want to hear from you too, because you mentioned earlier that you spent a lot of time embedding the data platform engineers into the product teams as well, because that's where they can get the business context and be able to support. How has that gone for Ramp in being able to get the entire organization thinking about impact in like very specific business contexts?
I think it's gone well for us. I mean, we're not thinking about building our feature platform, building model serving infrastructure, or building our analytics platform. We're thinking about detecting fraud on each swipe of the card or scoring how likely this visitor on ramp.com is to convert to a customer. Or it's about how can we fund or get funding from our revolving credit facilities on a daily basis or fund corporate cards. And so we're really glued into business problems rather than thinking about what the platform is. Yeah, we're of course building a platform, but we're always building for some business use case. And so when senior manager within engineering or outside of engineering asked me, hey, Ryan, what value does your team add? I could say, yeah, my platform is used with every card, with every visit to ramp.com, every single time a financing application is submitted, we're adding value.
We had a conversation at dinner once where you're talking about how you were experimenting with using DBT as a way to like prototype features because you felt like the barrier to get started was faster than maybe some of the other ways that people do feature engineering. I really liked that approach because it started with the business problem first and then figured out how to make it scalable, robust, real time. But tell me like a little bit more about what you tried and what you learned.
I can think of two specific use cases within Risk where we're using DBT in order to derive features for machine learning models or maybe general decision models. And so our first use case is something push in production. Shoot, that was last September, or it might have been November. And that's our probability of delinquency model. So that's a daily batch ML model. And the features for that model, we actually derive them with DBT, with Snowflake as part of our daily batch run. And so, I mean, if we think about DBT, it's a framework to define ELT pipelines and data transformations, and the feature extraction pipeline is, well, a pipeline for data transformation. And so, as long as we can specify those transformations with SQL, which more often than not for operational ML problems we can, DBT is a great framework. And if it's a daily 24-hour batch process, doing that within Snowflake as part of our existing analytics pipeline, it works beautifully. And so, I mean, that entire pipeline looks like, let's say we have pre-existing model already fits, which once a month on a daily basis, we run our daily DBT, the pipeline. And then as part of that, after that's done running, we kick off the Airflow DAG that runs inference for this probability of delinquency model. And so that's kind of a batch use case. A use case that we're just starting to explore is using technology called Materialize in DBT for real-time fraud alerts. And so Materialize is a streaming analytics database. The idea is that if you intuitively think about what a Materialize view is, that's what Materialize is. As soon as the underlying data updates, the aggregated Materialize view updates within seconds. And so that's really useful for fraud because fraud events, they often happen really quickly. You have someone that's buying, let's say, 50 $100 gift cards at Home Depot over the course of 5 minutes. And so if you can move much more quickly than, let's say, once per hour or once per day, you can save a lot of money. And so we need to use high velocity technology like Materialize. It's a Postgres dialect, and you could use DBT with Materialize. And so, I mean, that's another example where we can derive the features for some decision model with DBT and Materialize and maybe push those features to some policy layer to fire an alert or do things like lock a card or something like that.
Materialize is also a happy Ramp customer.
They sure are.
This October, join data practitioners at Coalesce, the analytics engineering conference hosted by DBT Labs. It's built by data people for data people. Register at coalesce.getdbt.com with the discount code podcast23, just for our listeners. That's podcast23 with a capital P. We'll see you there.
We're getting right next to an area that I'm spending a lot of time talking to folks about right now. We've talked about a lot of how you folks are embedding data team members with the different areas of the product. The two use cases that you just shared are DBT embedded directly into product experiences. How are you organizing your DBT code base to enable these different humans to have the decentralization that they need, but also to not get lost in their own islands?
Something that I think I have learned is 24-hour calculations are ultimately things that end up being used in production at low latency.
That is such a great, I want to put that on my wall. You may not realize this is true at the outset, but it will become true sooner or later.
Yeah, and I think two examples of this are when I got here, two relatively complex calculations we did every day were the amount of money in a company's bank account and their delinquency status on ramp. And those were calculated every 24 hours and used largely for reporting. Increasingly, we use these in operations where we say, you need to be able to go delinquent in an event-driven manner and then ungo delinquent in an event-driven manner because it relates to your ability to spend on ramp. And when an event happens that changes what is in your bank account, for most companies, we never have to deal with this. But when we lose money, we lose a lot of money and we lose it all at once for fraud. So knowing if a company has lost a lot of money in their bank account is really important. And so in some instances, I would say these things graduate up from DBT Snowflake to DBT Materialize and are still sort of the purview of the data team. But I think actually in other situations, we say, look, this is no longer a reporting metric. This is a state of a business. And sort of as such, it is a production grade input to all of our systems. And we actually want to adopt and rewrite this in sort of like our core transactional databases. So in terms of organization, I think actually we have seen some stuff not only graduate out of sort of Snowflake and DBT, but out of the hands of the data team entirely, which I think we view as like a massive success.
That's very interesting. I think that's a very reasonable thing to do. It's something I haven't honestly spent a lot of time thinking about. Like, is there a world in which we want DBT to be able to support that type of production criticality? Like, I think you're entirely appropriate in putting DBT largely in the bucket of like supporting importing workloads today. But it's an interesting question that I don't feel decided upon over the next like 5 to 10 year time frame, if that's the right path.
And I think another question is almost going to be the other direction. So for example, right now, if you build something in Snowflake, you're not going to power your production app on Snowflake. But, as hypothetically, like these hybrid tables start to approach and you can say, hey, Snowflake, at the end of this calculation, let's make sure that this table could support transactional workloads and not just analytical workloads. You can imagine a world where a data team is a little bit more able to provide delinquency status to a business.
You talking about Unistore?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you played around with it at all?
We have not.
No. Been asking for access, but they said, nope, not ready. So.
Oh, interesting. I agree. The lines, maybe the takeaway from like the two things that you just said is that the lines between the data team and traditional like engineering functions are gonna, all products are becoming data products, and who writes that code, what systems are used, I think is very much up for grabs.
I think largely like if you build something that is extremely helpful for your customers every 24 hours in Looker, it will start to migrate to more production settings. And I think that's like a really, really good opportunity.
One of the things that strikes me here, Ian, about your background is you tend to go to companies where data is mission critical for the success of the business. Like you're at a credit card company and as you said, like you need to have real-time understanding of the risk profile of a customer, because if you lose money, you end up losing it really quickly and all at once. And you used to work at Drizly, which was like an operationally complex business as well, where the difference between like success and not success can be a matter of like, what is your margin? Like, are you really having the operational excellence that you need to in delivering a very complex like service in the physical world? Do you think that there's something companies that don't have to rely as critically on data can learn from organizations that you've worked at in the past, where like data was really the differentiator for business success?
My main takeaway is you really know extremely well the area of your business where the constraint is. And I think you oftentimes are not well versed in talking about a new part of the business until that becomes the constraint. And so just as an example, Drizly, as you might imagine, had a lot of more low latency real-time infrastructure in my first
And maybe
day.
just describe what Drizly is for people.
Yes, Drizly is essentially Uber Eats for alcohol. So working with mom and pop liquor stores all the way up to big liquor stores, alcohol on demand delivered to your doorstep. And if you sort of think about 2020, we were much more demand constrained than supply constrained. We wanted to figure out, who are our customers? How do we get them? What's effective? We were spending so much of our energy on marketing and on our consumer product. We were not asking questions about how many deliveries a driver could do in an hour or what's the maximum number of orders a store could handle. And then obviously, like March and April 2020, all of society shuts down and Drizly
started
grew.
to drink a lot.
Yeah. And you're like nervous about going to liquor stores. So Drizly grew, about 300% in 6 weeks. And we learned a lot more about the other side of our challenges and operational things. We did not have a lot of these metrics in place and we had to build them very quickly. So I think honestly, that's just my biggest takeaway is thinking about what are the KPIs? How do you measure areas, not necessarily where your constraints of today are, but where your constraints of tomorrow are going to be.
I love that. Okay, we're going to wrap up here. We ask this to all of our guests, but looking 10 years out, what do you hope will be true for the industry? And Ryan, let's start with you.
5 to 10 years out, I hope there's a snowflake for developing and productionizing machine models. I mean, a easy to use, unified platform for iterating on feature engineering models based on those features, and then also deploying those models and those feature extraction pipelines into production, having it work both at low latency, high throughput in an online situation, and also building temporally consistent offline training data sets and regularly recurring model training pipelines while offline. It's right now there isn't really a snowflake for that type of problem, or like a unified platform that can do everything and do it really well and be easy to use. So I hope that'll be there in 5 to 10 years.
And what's the biggest problem there? Is it like the compute's not there, the tooling's not there?
It's the products and services are not quite there. I mean, data warehousing has been a problem that we've been thinking about since, let's say, the 1980s, whereas, machine learning, operational machine learning or deep learning is something that's mainly been reserved to the big tech companies for the last 20 years. And so if you have like kind of a small, scrappy startup like Ramp, that's trying to do the same things that, let's say, Facebook is doing, we don't have the same internal products and services already built out that a data scientist can leverage. We instead have to either build something out from scratch ourselves, or we have to rely on managed services. And we run into an issue with managed services where a lot of them, they're going to be young, scrappy startups themselves. So they might not have the full features that we want. They might not integrate beautifully with the other projects, or maybe they just have, they're buggy because they're the young companies and young products.
All right, I love that. Ian, how about you?
So looking 10 years out, my data career started a little over 10 years ago. And if you think about the entire history of tracking people on the internet until about 2016, it only went one direction, which is you can track them more than last year. Since then, it's only gone the other way. So GDPR passed in 2016. CCPA was 2018. Cambridge Analytica scandal came to light in 2018. On the industry front, Apple removed IDFAs in 2020. They masked IP addresses and email opens in 2021. And I think this year they're removing link tracking by default, which is going to, I think, ruin a lot of paid search and affiliate marketing. So in the last 10 years, obviously, billion-dollar companies have sort of risen and fallen. In the next 10 years, it's definitely going to be the same. This is before even thinking about LLMs and who owns that data and who owns the right to monetize that data. And so obviously, this stuff is really hard. There's trade-offs everywhere. The laws are hard to interpret. They're expensive to comply with, to the point where I think oftentimes only the incumbents can afford to, which I don't think is the best outcome for the world. I don't really find oftentimes that the regulators and the laws make a ton of sense. And so really my hope would be that, both at the national and international level, we elect thoughtful regulators who are well-versed in how data on the internet works. They write great laws, that we all think about the societal benefits and consequences in aggregate, like for all individuals. And just very generally, 10 years from now, we have balanced, the rights of consumers to understand how their data is being used, while also, continuing to keep the entrepreneurial drive and pace of AI learning, which I do really, truly believe can lead to better lives.
Ian, this is the most optimistic answer to this question we have ever received. I don't know that anyone has ever given us an answer to this question that is like, I want regulators who are well-informed and who make good regulations. That's wonderful. I mean,
it's a bit of a pipe dream, I know.
I'm with you. I'm sensing a bit of an Andrew Yang vibe coming from you. So you let me know when you're ready to make your run to be head of a regulatory body.
PII masking 2028. You heard it here first.
All right, we'll end it there. Thanks, Ian and Ryan, for joining us. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for your time, and thanks for building such a great product.
The Analytics Engineering Podcast is sponsored by DBT Labs and is hosted by Tristan Handy and myself, Julia Schottenstein. Have comments, questions, or guest suggestions? Email us at podcast@dbtlabs.com. Our producers are Jeff Fox and Dan Poppy. If you enjoy the show, please drop a review or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening.